This is Marymount's Ethics Week, and the topic for this year, it's celebrated across all the divisions of the university. And there's events almost every day this week from various disciplines. And welcome to the Doctorate of Science and Cybersecurity and the School of Technology and Innovations program for the evening. I'd like to introduce my producers of the event. We have recent alum, Dr. Josh Scarpino, class of 2022, and Ashley Jones, who's in the program. They're the producers of tonight's event, and I'll turn it over to them.
I'll start. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you. So as the use of artificial intelligence or AI becomes more widespread, it's increasingly important for technologists and information security professionals to have a good understanding of the security and ethical implications associated with AI. Furthermore, at the rate the industry is growing, it's critical that organizations begin to adopt and standardize how they approach their AI practices. So I will introduce Ryan Carrier, our first panelist. He is an executive director and founder for Humanity. Ryan Carrier is he spent 25 years in finance and has experience in global business risk management and offers a unique perspective on how to manage enterprise risk. Ryan is currently focused on independent audit of AI systems as one means to mitigate risk associated with artificial intelligence and building processes for auditing corporate AIs. Using a global crowdsourced process to determine best practices, Ryan has also conducted business in over 55 countries and is a frequent speaker at industry conferences and for government agencies around the world. He's graduated from the University of Michigan and is a chartered financial analyst.
I have the pleasure of introducing Les McCullum. Les McCullum is currently the Executive Director and Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Chicago Medical Center. He brings over 25 years of experience as a senior cybersecurity and risk management executive, and his experiences multiple industries. Presently, he serves as the CISO for the University of Chicago and has instituted and governed security programs that include cyber and IT operational risk in both the public and private sector. As a CISO, he is responsible for oversight of information security programs, including governance, risk and compliance, identity and access management, disaster recovery, security operations, and application security. Currently, he is actively involved in several client advisory boards of industry-leading security and non-for-profit organizations. He's held several non-for-profit board seats and was recognized as a top 100 global CISO by hottopic.ht. Les is an advocate of continuous learning in the cyber risk management space, and he's a graduate of North Carolina Central University, as well as Georgetown University, where he received his Master of Professional Studies in Cyber Risk Management.
And it's my good fortune to co-chair a federal NICE working group with Richard Spires, who is currently CEO and director of a firm he co-founded, Learning Tree International. That's a leading provider of workforce development and hands-on IT and management training. Mr. Spires was appointed and served as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Chief Information Officer for several years. About 10 years ago, served as vice chair of the federal government CIO Council and co-chair of the Committee for National Security Systems, which sets standards for the U.S. government systems. He has a BS in electrical engineering, a BA in math from University of Chicago, MS in electrical engineering from George Washington University, and won many awards for his leadership in IT, including the ACT-IAC Leadership Award about 5 or 6 years ago. So thank each panelist for joining us tonight. We'll aim for about 2 minutes for you to respond. So I don't know which of my handy producers here has got the stopwatch, but I'm just going to sit back in a minute and enjoy hearing these responses. But let me ask the first question. And we'll start with Richard. I'm curious to hear what the response is going to be from each of you. We do teach ethics in our business and technology programs. It's required course all the way up through the master's degree. Is ethics something that we should be teaching?
Oh, goodness. Of course. I mean, it's interesting. I'm gonna go back a couple of years. I was asked to speak at a conference, and it was, and this is beyond just an AI kind of discussion, but I was asked to speak at a conference, and we were throwing around subjects, and they said, well, you've done a number of different things in IT, and at least some feel I've had some real success. Why don't you talk about what it means to be a leader and be successful in the technology field? And in putting together my comments, I ended up with 12 recommendations. And the very first one, I said, be a person of integrity. And to me, ethics, you might talk a little bit differently than integrity, but I think these are intertwined concepts, okay? And I think it's so important on a personal basis within the technology field to be a person of your word, to be able to stand up and frankly, and sometimes make some very difficult decisions. I mean, I walked away from a very lucrative position once in my career because I didn't feel like in that particular organization that it was an organization of integrity. And I decided to leave that organization. And it's a very personal story, but I'm just saying to you, I think it's so important, and I think it colors everything we do. And so I applaud Marymount for having ethics as an important part of a technology-based curriculum.
Thank you. Let's move on to Les. Should we be teaching ethics?
Absolutely. Should I come back and say no? No. Ethics should be taught in particularly in information technology, as technology continues to play an increasing role in our lives. It's essential that individuals in the field of information technology, for example, understand the ethical implications of their work, as well as the impact to their technology that it could have on society on a whole. So in the field of technology, I think that ethical considerations can range from questions about privacy and data security, even issues related to the use of artificial intelligence and the impact of technology on employment and the economy for all practical matters. So by teaching ethics in IT, students can gain a deeper understanding of the ethical dilemmas that they may face in future careers, and develop the skills and the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions that align with their personal values and the greater good. So.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Ryan.
Thank you. It's an easy one for me as well, because what we've built in the structure that we're putting in place for independent audit of AI systems includes a standing and empowered ethics committee. So if you're not teaching it, then we're in trouble because we got no one to be on it. A standing and empowered ethics committee is necessary because these tools, AI, algorithmic, and autonomous systems, are socio-technical systems. So not only are we embedding, receiving outcomes from these as humans, but we're embedding our humanity in these tools through the use of our personal data, preferences, inferences, et cetera. And therefore, we're embedding our ethics into these tools as well. And so what we found when we were trying to maximize risk mitigations to these tools across the algorithmic lifecycle is, unfortunately, we are leaving instances of ethical choice to designers, developers, and data scientists who are often not even trained in ethics in any way, shape, or form. And they suffer from sunk cost bias and confirmation bias. So the nature of the Standing and Empowered Ethics Committee is to extract those instances of ethical choice and give them to the standing and empowered body with trained experts in algorithm ethics. So not only am I going to ask and hope that you continue to teach ethics, but that you grow into teaching algorithm ethics as well. and get specific in terms of applications. Thanks.
Great advice. Thank you. And if Dr. Doyle is on the call, I hope I did my job as a good colleague to stress the importance of ethics in our curriculum and at least guard 3 credits, if not more, saving it for ethics courses. Okay, I'll turn it over to my student producers for the event, Joshua and Ashley.
Yep. So next question is going to be, it's going to be for Les first. And this is, can you provide an example of how you model ethical decision-making for others?
Wow. So when you start to look at modeling ethic decisions, and here is where I'm gonna start, right? I will start in the field of healthcare, being that that's where I am right now. And when I look at it, it is being widely adopted throughout our healthcare industry and has potentially revolutionized the way that healthcare is delivered. So when you think about how you're building these ethical models, I would say that in our case, we want to make sure that we are building them in such a way that we're providing diagnosis and treatment planning, for example, drug discovery and development, clinical decision support. And they have to be done in such a way that they're not biased towards one particular group or ethnicity or another. They have to have unbiased, it has to have an unbiased model. So when we look at, for example, the diagnosis and treatment planning, you know, algorithms can analyze medical images and assist in diagnoses in various medical conditions. And so when we are building these models, they have to build in such a way that if we are going to use them as physicians, for example, they're not going to harm or cause harm to the individuals in the patient care that we are delivering these services for. And so I believe that it's very instrumental that we protect the data model and the algorithm that we use to and that is designed, and that we look at it in such a way that it doesn't have any biases best we possibly can.
Please ensure you're on mute. I'll say that again real quick. Thanks, Les. I appreciate that. Ryan, same question to you. Can you provide an example of how you model ethical decisions for making for others?
The example that I can provide is one of really infrastructure and process, not a specific use case per se. So when we talk about modeling ethical decisions, it starts by establishing the appropriate code of ethics for the organization under which these decisions will be reached. And that code of ethics includes understanding your relevant legal frameworks and understanding the shared moral frameworks of the organization. Establishing that code of ethics in a public way, and then applying it across this organized, standing, and empowered ethics committee to adjudicate instances of ethical choice according to that code. This is also done in a transparent way. One of the main reasons that we want experts adjudicating these instances of ethical choice is that it's rarely about right and wrong. It's more about process and trying to establish what is the correct decision to be making on behalf of the organization under this shared moral framework. And therefore, the execution is more based upon that broad ethos that's established for the body, produced in a transparent way, which actually creates and stimulates what we call a virtuous feedback loop, where you can reach these conclusions, share them broadly, and then allow for reasonable critique amongst the society that interacts with these decisions. Because if you're making a true instance of ethical choice, then really, once you've made that choice out in the marketplace, this whole group could disagree with that choice. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter, because we can all have opinions as to what are the right ethical choices to make, but there's really only one group that gets to adjudicate if that is right or wrong. and that would be society broadly speaking. So for example, you could take the famous trolley problem and apply it to Tesla. Do you hit grandma or the babies? And Tesla can make the choice that we hit grandma. And everyone on this call could disagree and say, no, this is what we have to do. But again, it doesn't matter. It's Tesla's shared moral framework, and they have the right to do that until society, through this virtuous feedback loop, can decide to change that through law. And so what we want to establish is this ecosystem of transparency and process that leads to this virtuous feedback loop. I hope that answers the question sufficiently, John.
That's fine. And we'll finish with you, Richard. Can you provide an example of how you model ethical decision-making for others?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to give a real world example that I was involved with when I was a CIO at the Department of Homeland Security. And within Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, as most people would know it by, there's an organization known as the Targeting Center, kind of an interesting name, right? And the idea there is to try to bring together disparate sources of information and use all types of algorithms, okay, including machine learning algorithms, to be able to find anomalies that could lead to uncovering what, it could be immigration issues, it could be having to do with issues of smuggling things across our border, different types of things, obviously all related to law enforcement in one way or another. And, interesting set of problems arise. And kind of picking up a bit on what some of Ryan's themes, some of these rules are pretty simple. And in fact, there's quite a legal framework, as you might expect, and regulatory framework around what data can be used, how it can be used, when do you have to stop. But then think about it in a legal or law enforcement sense. If you're using machine learning algorithms and all of a sudden you're going into a realm where you're not exactly sure how decisions are being made in autonomous fashion, does that not cross some lines potentially? And these are things that, frankly, I was involved with even almost 10 years ago now. And so this is not brand new issue. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, right, as we're seeing AI tools proliferate throughout society. But these are issues that are being dealt with. And I think, again, picking up on Ryan's point, we would put in place, if you will, committees that would really dive into these kinds of issues. So that if you're going to take some kind of legal action based on a decision from a targeting center, you better be able to explain exactly how those pieces were brought together and how that fits within the legal and regulatory framework under the United States Code. And so this is a dilemma that we're facing. I'm not there now, but I'm sure it's not gotten any easier. And I suspect as these algorithms have gotten more and more complex in what they can do, that they're continuing to face these kinds of challenges. And I think it manifests itself as a great example in the law enforcement community, where you want to use disparate sources of data, but you want to do it in the appropriate manner.
Thank you. I will pass off to Ashley.
Those are great responses. I think that this next question kind of segues into what Richard was speaking about previously, and we are going to actually start off with Ryan. Ryan, based on your experience, what is one critical risk that is currently evolving that you're seeing as associated with AI, that you believe that organizations, both in the profit and non-public, and the public sector, should focus on?
Sure, it would be the process of risk assessment. Many of you may know that NIST just completed their AI risk management framework. And I don't mind sharing that it was a battle to, at least from our perspective, and you can imagine what our sort of perspective would be, to break NIST out of a mold that was focused on risk from an organizational perspective. And again, I mentioned that these are socio-technical tools, so their impacts on humans are essentially double, both the outcomes as well as the inputs to the equation. And so ensuring that risk assessment is conducted with a 360-degree perspective. We call it diverse input and multi-stakeholder feedback. Ensuring that that pool of human risk assessors who engage in the risk management process, which is identifying risk inputs and indicators, analyzing, evaluating, treating, mitigating risk, and then disclosing residual risk, that those who engage in that process represent all stakeholders, including impacted users, including representatives of nature, broadly speaking, or the environment, said a different way. And making sure that that pool of diverse inputs, that pool of human risk assessors meet the need or the definition of diversity. This is actually one of the roles that our ethics committee plays under our audit requirements to essentially assess these pools of human risk assessors and ensure they are sufficiently diverse as defined in a code of ethics and established not only across protected categories and intersections thereof, but also diversity of thought and diversity of lived experience. An example I often give is that we could look at a picture of human risk assessors and they could be different colors and different ages, and they could be different genders as we see them. But if they all went to MIT, they might think the same way. And we may not have sufficiency of diversity of thought or lived experience to identify all risks that may result from the system. So this is a key and critical part of the process that it gets deployed, not only in design, but also development, deployment, and even decommissioning when we assess the risk all through the algorithmic life cycle. Hope that answers the question, Ashley.
It does, definitely efficiently as well. Definitely want to hear, Les, what are your thoughts on what a critical risk should be considered for organizations involving AI?
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I'm gonna go back to my earlier comment on the first question because I think it's very critical so that people really understand. But I think one critical risk associated with AI that organizations should focus on is the potential of the biased outcome. As an AI algorithm is trained on data sets, they can absorb and perpetuate biases that are present in the data that is trained on, right? So this can result in unfair and discriminatory decisions, particularly in the areas when you talk about credit lending or criminal justice and even hiring practices of an organization. So when we think about the biases, one of the things that I think that an organization could do in order to mitigate this risk, organizations should carefully consider the data sets used to train the AI algorithms and to take steps to ensure that they are represented and free from those biases. And additionally, I think that organizations should regularly monitor and test AI systems to detect and address any biases that may arise. It's important to consider the ethical implications of the AI and to ensure that the technology is being used in a responsible and fair manner. So that's my response.
That was excellent. I think it definitely ties into Ryan's holistic approach that he has recommended for organizations. So Richard, it leaves it to you. What are your thoughts? What is the most critical, element that organizations should consider?
Yeah, I appreciate the answers from both the panelists and very insightful. I would pick up on this theme. I've been surprised, and again, I'll go back to government examples where both at a DHS level and at a federal government level, I really felt like we struggled with that holistic view of risk. And there's a lot, some of it goes back to the bias issue, and I'm not talking about just an AI system, I'm talking about in general, the management of a government entity. And I think from a risk assessment, and I've written about this, that the need to look at enterprise risk and all dimensions of it is so critical. And on a very specific example, and I've been very public with this, when I entered DHS, I was kind of stunned that I felt like we were way underplaying and way underinvesting in the cybersecurity risk to our critical infrastructure industries across this country. I could still argue we are underinvesting, although I think we are doing better. But as compared to other types of physical risks, and why would that be? And I would argue that we have suffered greatly in cybersecurity attacks, but it's not as evident to the public, right? There's not been the physical manifestations of that in the United States that have led to us taking it as seriously as I think we should be. Just as one example from the societal perspective and how politicians ultimately view some of these things. So I think, to me, that's the largest risk, if you will, we face as a society, is not understanding and appropriately assessing enterprise risk to our society, and then appropriately acting on and investing where we should.
Thank you. So, shifting just a little bit, we talked a little bit about the risk to organizations. Now we're going to move on. I'm going to start with you, Richard, again, since you just finished. So what do you believe is a foundational need for organizations to prioritize to ensure they have responsible AI, especially in areas that are deploying high impact systems such as criminal justice or employment or in finance, as Les mentioned?
Yeah, I'll go, Josh. I'm going to go back to the theme I mentioned before. There's good on the criminal justice side. I mean, in today's world, there's good frameworks for the data you can use, when you can use it, things like that. But once you get into the algorithmic use of and what is being done, it starts to blur quite a bit. And so I think that this idea of having the processes, as Ryan was back to his point about the processes in place to be able to use, we want to use the tools, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm the first to say we want to use every single type of technology that we can to support our criminal justice system, as an example, and our homeland security. But doing it responsibly, doing it in a way that is transparent, is explainable, is, I think, very important. And so there are going to be lines, there's going to be lanes that you can't violate when you set those kind of parameters out. And I will say, based on my experience working at DHS, working with Department of Justice at the federal level, I think they've done a good job of setting a lot of those lanes, if you will, and staying in those lanes. But I think it's going to be a constant process, not battle, but constant diligence required to make sure that we continue to do so.
Thanks. Ryan, same question you. I don't know if you have anything to add based on your last comment, but do you believe there a foundational need for organizations that they can prioritize to ensure responsible AI?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on and build on Richard's point. So for those of you not familiar, For Humanity's primary effort is independent audit of AI systems, bringing financial audits with a 50-year track record of building an enormous infrastructure of trust and bringing that to what we call AI, algorithmic, and autonomous systems, AAA systems, and establishing that framework for independent audit of AI systems. We bring a 4-line of defense model: compliance by design at the designer, developer, deployment level; oversight committees built on expertise, knowledge, and risk assessment to oversee that first line; a 3rd line of defense that establishes processes and plugs it into enterprise risk management. But the 4th line is the most critical, and it's the standard we most believe in, which is that independent assessment of compliance is a game changer, because we think that self-assessment and the approaches that many of us might take to meet these challenges, we all start with good intent. We all start with the idea that we will build compliance, that we will do the right thing, that we will follow an ethical course, that we will establish responsible AI, until we get busy, until we get distracted, until something comes up. The very nature, and Marymount University as a school preaches this, you just may not realize the point, which is when you have third-party oversight, when you have a teacher, it becomes a game changer because now you actually do your homework because someone's going to check. And the same is true with independent audit of AI systems. We comply with these responsibilities because we know a third party will come and check our work. And so the process that we're growing into all around the world is moving from a self-assessment approach, which has not worked very well, especially out of Silicon Valley, and moving into mandatory independent audits, Digital Services Act, New York City Automated Employment Decision Tool bias audit laws, and others that are coming, mandating this third-party independent oversight on behalf of society that says, here are the rules. And these third-party auditors will say, we will check on your behalf that compliance has occurred. So establishing compliance by design frameworks in that context would be my answer, Josh.
Thank you. And Richard, Les, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And then for you, see if you have anything else to contribute.
Yeah, no, these gentlemen, they really touch base on a lot of the areas that I would, and I hope that my response would actually bring everything back home, right? And so when I look at it and look at these high impact areas and the prioritization on the fundamental or the foundational elements, it has to deal with transparency and accountability. Organizations must be transparent about how their AI systems work and the decisions that they make and be accountable for those outcomes, right? This includes providing explanations for decisions and making sure that the systems are designed in such a way that they can be audited and regulated, right? So that's what Ryan just mentioned, right? And then there's the other element of human oversight. While AI can automate many of the processes, it's important that we have human oversight in these high impact areas and where decisions have serious consequences, just like they do in healthcare, in my industry, right? And this includes having trained experts who can actually review and validate the decisions that are made by any AI system. And then two more points I want to make: fairness and non-discrimination. Again, it will be a theme with me. But organizations must ensure that the AI systems are fair and do not discriminate against any group of people. This requires that ongoing monitoring and testing of the systems to detect and address any of these biases that arise. And then the last thing I want to mention here is the continuing improvement. And as AI technology continues to evolve, new risks will emerge, and organizations must be prepared to continuously evaluate and improve their systems to ensure that they remain responsible and ethical.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent, Les. Kind of directly ties into what we're going to talk about now, which are the consequences that you believe are going to be of concern by building opaque systems or black box systems that are not transparent in nature. So what are the consequences that are associated? And we'll start with you again.
Yeah, so, in being in security, and a lot of times we use these black box type solutions to do a lot of our security operations stuff, right? But one of the things, and what I would say, is a lack of accountability. So when you have an AI system that's not transparent, it can be difficult to determine why particular decisions was made, and making it challenging to hold the system or its creators, really accountable for its actions. The lack of trust, if people cannot understand how an AI decision is, or an AI system, I would say, is making a decision, then they may be less likely to trust it, which could limit its adoption and effectiveness, and just really ruin the mission that if you put a proper governance structure in play and a strategy on how you're going to deploy your AI solution, it can make it not useful for the organization and not widely adopted. And then, as it was mentioned earlier, around regulatory challenges, right? So regulators may struggle to ensure that the AI systems are safe, fair, and are aligned with ethical principles when the inner workings of the system are not transparent. And I think the last thing here is the difficult in improving the systems, right? So an opaque AI system can make it difficult for researchers and developers to even identify and address errors that biases in the system and hindering progress in the field. So therefore, it's important to strive for transparency and interoperability in an AI system, and to ensure that they are trustworthy, they are fair, they are aligned with ethical principles.
Awesome. Well, let's hear from your counterparts. What do you believe, Ryan, or to build off of that, the consequences?
Actually, build off a lot of what Les has covered already in terms of bias. So the For Humanity infrastructure calls for examining 3 kinds of bias in 3 dimensions. So we look at bias in data, we look at bias in architectural inputs, and we look at bias in outcomes. And then we look at bias in the next dimension, which is bias as in the statistical, the mathematical measure of bias, but also we examine cognitive bias, and we require an assessment on non-response or technology barrier bias across each of those areas of the algorithm and its life cycle. And in doing so, what we hope to establish is the maximum amount of mitigations. We hold fast that bias can't be eliminated. Mathematically speaking, it can't be eliminated. And so it's a constant goal of mitigation. How best can we avoid bias across these systems? And then when we talk about understanding these models, we take a 4-factor approach: interpretability, technical jargon, feedback to designers and developers for tooling and tuning the models themselves. But then, required by the EU AI Act and an expanding number of laws around the world, what's called exceptions interpretability, which actually gets back to Les's point on humans in command. There is required human oversight for high-risk AIs, and those humans have to be armed with a real-time interface that produces exceptions, anomalies, dysfunctions, and expected foreseen misuse. This is still technical. You still need training on this, and that's why we still call it exceptions interpretability. Leading on to explainability. Now we're translating into users, the actual public, who require clear and plain language, an explanation on the logic of the system, because that is what is fair. It is also what is required under the law, under GDPR, let alone the EU AI Act. And then finally, explainability plus. Here we want to celebrate the human dignity of you just had an automated decision happen to you. And when that's negative, it's hard, it hurts. You might not be able to get access to goods and services you need. Explainability plus celebrates your human dignity, that you came looking for a solution, didn't get it. But when you provide as the operator, as the builder of these tools, explainability plus, that educates that user on how they might get a more favorable response. Think of a creditworthiness decision. Don't ask for 500,000, ask for 400,000. Instead of having a contract job, try and turn that into a salaried position. Changes that you can make that will actually allow you to achieve your goals. And thus we bring human dignity back to this process.
That was excellent. Sorry, I was muted. So next we're going to go over to Richard. Richard, what are some consequences that you believe are associated with black box or opaque systems?
Yeah, well, first I want to, my colleagues, and I really, the passion that Les showed in his answer, I thought was, and it just very, very good. I'm not sure I have a lot to add, other than the fact that, yeah, certainly I believe, and I think it's shown again in government circles, that this notion, two things, and one Ryan talked about, this idea of independent assessments of results, and holding organizations accountable, and Les even mentioned that as well, I think is so important, because to the point Les was making, I mean, if you don't have transparency, if you can't understand the logic that a decision was made, and it is a high impact system, you're in a bad position as an organization. And so I do think this is an area we have to tread lightly. We have to move forward, but continue to move forward in such a way that transparency is there, that those independent assessments are being done to hold organizations accountable.
All right, sounds like accountability is the theme. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Joshua.
Yes, and we're going to expand on something that Ryan touched on with explainability plus, right? So one of the things that's critical is that we understand why they made a decision. So on that note, we'll start with Ryan. Do you believe that organizations should disclose the use of AI? And is there ever a time you believe it's appropriate for organizations to not disclose when it has impacted an individual?
And Ryan, before you begin your response, can I broaden the topic to, there's a couple of entries in the chat about facial recognition. I know Vito's getting ready for a trip to Vegas, so he's concerned about the casinos. So there's a few comments about facial recognition. So let's broaden the use of, this kind of technology too, if the panelists don't mind.
No, not at all. So the very nature of these processes begs a question of necessity and proportionality as starting points. Is AI, our algorithmic systems, the best and most appropriate way? And then when they're deployed, are they deployed proportionately? So for example, if we're doing mass surveillance of a train station, and the theory is that we want to protect people from terrorist attacks and try to identify in advance, you can understand the value in that. But at the same time, we have to recognize the trade-off of a loss of privacy and what mass surveillance does to us as a society and how we behave and its overall impacts. So this tension and trade-off process is governed and assessed through proportionality in the For Humanity Independent Audit of AI Systems process to deal with exactly these kind of issues. AIs that impact humans must always be disclosed. Plain and simple, full stop. There's very little argument against this, okay? And in fact, we would translate that forward to requirements for I'll just say GANs, just to be quick, and deepfake technology requiring fixed watermarking and necessitated authorship. So for example, ChatGPT is all the rage. There is very little argument for hiding the fact that ChatGPT just produced whatever solution is in place. And so having or being required to disclose that is key and critical for users to be properly informed. And by the way, users are not only those who execute ChatGPT, but think of all the teachers here in this room. What are we dealing with in terms of what's been handed in? And then finally, in terms of disclosures, we require an FDA-esque residual risk disclosure that essentially shares with the user what the risks of using the tool will be in advance of using the tool. Exactly the same as many of you would see the drug commercials on TV, right? The first 30 seconds is, blue sky and mountains and families running through the woods and smiling, and they tell you what the drug will help with. But what happens in that second 30 seconds? You're going to get redness at the site, your joints are going to hurt, and you might get diarrhea, and you could die. But the point of the disclosure of these residual risks is to make you an informed user prior to using the tool, understanding the risks and equally understanding the benefits. Then we are an informed population. And most key and critically, we can overcome automation bias, which is something we suffer from greatly as a society. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Ryan. Pass on to you, Les. Do you believe organizations should disclose the use of AI? And do you ever think it's appropriate to not disclose it when it has an impact on individuals?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go against the grain, but I do want to first say to Vito is that if you win in Vegas and win often and big, you don't have to worry about if they will remember your face on facial recognition. You will be recognized in every casino that you walk into. So I wish you good luck. But back to the question, yes, you know, I really do feel like organizations should generally disclose the use of AI, especially when it has an impact on individuals, right? So transparency is an important aspect of responsible AI use, and it helps to build the trust with the people who are affected by the technology. However, there are circumstances when and where it's appropriate for organizations not to disclose the use of AI. For example, in certain security or defense applications, the disclosure of the use of AI could compromise your national security or put people in danger. So in those cases, the potential harm of disclosure may outweigh the benefits of the transparency. And it is also important to note that there may be legal requirements regarding the disclosure of AI use. So organizations should be aware and comply with those regulatory requirements or those type of requirements.
Thank you. Richard, same question to you. Should organizations disclose the use of AI?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on more of the privacy issues here. It was a good question in the chat, and then Donna mentioned it about facial recognition. I think we are on a slippery slope here that we have not yet come to terms with. We don't have a Congress that's really dealing effectively yet with these issues on from a societal basis, how to handle the idea that more and more we're going to be monitored with all kinds of systems, obviously facial recognition being one type. And where do we draw that line? I mean, having worked in a law enforcement agency, I do have strong opinions about the need for law enforcement to have access to data that would protect all of us. On the other hand, I can certainly argue the other side, which is I do not want organizations to understand where I'm at, what I'm doing, when it does not impact any kind of safety issue for others. And so I think this is a key issue that needs to be dealt with at a federal level, at a state level. And I don't think our politicians today are taking this seriously enough as we continue to advance the technology and the implications of that. To me, it's a huge ethical issue that we face in this country. And I'm hoping, I don't think it's going to happen in this Congress, but I'm hoping in the next, 4 to 6 years that we do get some legislation that does set some guidelines about how to handle these things. One specific example is that use of data. We do have lots of laws in place that allow certain law enforcement agencies to use data in certain, in certain circumstances. And I think we need to expand that kind of framework, for this kind of use of data as it becomes more and more prevalent and we get more and more invasion of our privacy. So as an example, I'm not necessarily against the use of facial recognition technology for specific types of purposes to find specific individuals, let's say. But then if I'm caught in that, then that data cannot be used in any other way, right? That there are limitations on how that data can be used. Those are the kinds of practical legal frameworks that I think we need to expand upon.
Thanks for that.
It's excellent. So what I'm going to do, just to do a timer, we're down to about the last 10 minutes. So I'm going to combine my last two questions. Richard, we're going to start out with you because you just provide such excellent answers, but let's talk about safety, security, but awareness, right, and education. So do you believe that organizations should take extra steps to educate their employees about the adoption of AI technologies, but also, right, how do they keep pace with those deployments and tie that into education?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess the simple answer is, of course, that, responsible organizations should be educating their employees about how that organization is using technology. We talk about AI, but technology in general, okay, to deliver their mission or deliver their services, whatever it may be. So to me, that's a responsible organization. I'm not sure I quite understand the implication of where you're headed with the rest of that question, though, and maybe I'll ask you to clarify beyond just that simple answer. Let me ask you back. So clarify the question for me about education beyond what I just said.
Sure.
What
So
that is.
yeah, so really it ties into the workforce. Like, what are the implications for the workforce, right? We deploy these AI technologies,
Mhm.
and I can tell you where the question came from. I was speaking with a technologist, one of my former peers, and the idea behind, we have AI taking over jobs, right? So individuals might be concerned that they might be losing a job because now we have automation. Let's think of a fast food location. They don't have as many employees in their environment. So should we be educating them on what the AI is doing so that they can improve their skill set and be a step ahead? Or are we looking at it from an educational perspective of deployment? Are they deploying it safely? So you can look at it two tiers or
In those ways,
either of the
yeah.
avenues. Mhm.
Yeah, I think responsible organizations certainly, and it's your point. I mean, AI is starting. Other types of process automation is certainly displacing jobs over time. It's also creating jobs, right? And so there's a skill set issue. I hearken back to work that we've done in the federal government again about trying to work on the reskilling. I've been in the training business now for quite a while. And how do we help government agencies in particular with the reskilling initiatives that have to go on as they do process automation? And many of these tasks that used to involve individuals can be automated and are being automated. So to me, I think I come back to that transparency theme that I'm big on. Organizations should be transparent with their employees. They should lay out what their goals and objectives are that impact employees over time, and educate those employees about what they're doing, and then offer opportunities where it makes sense. Certainly in the government realm, they should be offering opportunities for reskilling. In the private sector, I think it's more a matter of, there's going to be displacements, and that's just always the nature of the private sector. And offer opportunities for people to reskill where it makes sense for the organization as well.
That's awesome, especially with all the resource availability constraints we have taking place.
Yeah.
Les, I know you're passionate about upskilling and diversity in the workforce. So I'm curious on your thoughts on, how organizations can educate their employees, and definitely that reskilling question. I'd like to pose that to you as well.
Yeah, Ashley, I respect that question. And one of the things in what I would say is that every organization is not equal, right? There are some organizations that are going to be heavy use and resellers of AI products and tools. And then there's going to be other organizations that are actually going to use them sporadically throughout different parts of their organization. And so do I believe wholeheartedly should organizations be trained up on AI? Absolutely, right? But I have a hard enough problem trying to train an entire organization and get them skilled up on cybersecurity awareness. So I can't even imagine what AI is going to be like for an organization, in particular when there comes with certain biases and when you have employees that are thinking about how AI is taking jobs away from them. Right? It is a tough enough challenge when you are trying to change a culture and get them to adopt what is best and what is safest within an organization. Cybersecurity training is probably one of the toughest jobs that I have to deal with, or is part of my purview, outside of managing people. The technology piece is easy. It's changing the behavior of individuals that can be very challenging, and what can make the education of an environment or a company around AI successful or not. So education can help employees to understand the benefits of AI and how it can help them in performing their jobs and even more effectively, right? And it also can dispel any misconceptions or the fears about technology and encourage employees to embrace it as a tool to support their work. But I think that it's going to be a challenge. It's a challenge for us as seasoned cybersecurity professionals to change the culture of an organization. And then the adoption of this new technology right now, it's going to be challenging. So that should be a great book, whoever comes up with it on change the culture of the organization.
The three of you can write it. The three of you can write it together. Ryan, definitely want to get your perspective on this. So you're probably seeing it at the forefront, but what is the impact to the workforce, these new technologies being rolled out?
I'm going to take a slightly different perspective and not think about kind of the upskilling part of it and focus on the need to remember that this is one of the best places and resources we have to mitigate risk. So what we require is actually the establishment of a process that allows employees to raise questions and bring concerns forward about these tools, because often they're best placed to identify where these challenges can come. And just like Les just mentioned, this is culture change, right? You have to create an environment that embraces critique and question without punishment. And we actually, in fact, require that you train the employees on whistleblower rights that they have. Because what that essentially says is we recognize that if we are not behaving correctly, that there are other tools that will make us behave correctly. And when you recognize that, you create a culture in your organization that says, we want to do it the right way. And so once you establish this process and procedure for employees to raise questions, to bring up issues, to identify bias, now we've armed those who are best positioned to bring forward genuine and actual risks that we can aim to mitigate. In addition to that, we have 4 required trainings. The first is training on automation bias and how to avoid it. The second is ethical choice awareness across the organization to increase the way that we see when these ethical choices occur. The next is disability, inclusion, and accessibility. How can we improve the way that our tools and interfaces are inclusive in the environment, as well as accessible and usable by all persons? That is equality and fairness. And finally, a huge problem that we see is nudge awareness and deceptive design. We did in For Humanity's 1,200 people from 79 countries and growing like crazy. We did a small test of nudge awareness and deceptive design. 2 people saw any nudges, 2 out of 60. It was shocking. So raising and helping people to understand nudges, where they occur, deceptive design as it can be built into the system. These are obviously expert level trainings for ethics officers who are reviewing to avoid these because the law says you can't do them. In other jurisdictions, California is now one with the age appropriate design code. So those are the 4 kind of key trainings that are required in independent audit. And we want to establish this culture that empowers employees to be a true first line of defense on risk. Hope that answers the question.
That was
Thank you.
outstanding. Yeah. Pass back to Josh.
So we have just 3 minutes left. I wanted to make sure all the participants are available on time to run over a couple minutes because we took a little longer. Is that all right with everybody?
A couple of minutes I can do.
I know.
Believe it or not, I have to be
I
at UVA at the bottom of the hour. So, I'm just making the tour of universities tonight.
I'll start with Les on this one. So do you believe there is a need for increased focus on cybersecurity regarding AI technologies? And is there a specific trend that you're concerned with?
Yeah, I can look at this in 2 ways, right? There's a protection against AI generated attacks. And I think that there was a comment around AI warfare in the chat that just happened to come up. And then protecting AI solutions that are used by organizations. So I'll briefly start with the first one, right? So defending against a cyber attack generated by any AI threat actors requires, a multi-layered approach, where it would be what we would call administrative controls as well as technical controls. And what that would mean is implementing some of the robust security controls. It was mentioned here earlier around the NIST controls or the CIS 18 critical controls. Any of those foundational control frameworks would be, par for the course here. Conducting regular security assessments, monitoring for suspicious activity. And in this particular case, you can use AI solutions to kind of monitor for that type of stuff, right? I have a AI solution right now that baselines what normal activity across the infrastructure looks like. And then any deviation from there, my security operations team is notified, and they begin to perform recon on that variation, right? But then when you look at the other side of it, protecting the AI technology itself, you want to protect against adversarial attacks, right? You don't want a solution that's vulnerable to those particular types of attacks. You want to protect the model itself from any theft. Data privacy has been mentioned, and supply chain risks. We haven't talked much, and for me as a cybersecurity professional and a CISO, I'm always concerned around third-party risk, because a lot of the solutions that we're talking about that are AI-based, those are hosted solutions or solutions that we buy from a third-party provider. So I'm concerned more about their security posture and how they protect all the things that I just mentioned around the model, the data, and everything else. Because if they don't, then we have to reconsider if we're going to go with that particular AI solution. So those are a couple of things there. Like I said, two ways to look at the question. I just provided you a response on cyber attacks using AI and the actual protection of AI.
Thank you, Les. Move on to you, Richard. Any comments on that?
Yeah. First, Les, excellent answer, and you could tell you're a cybersecurity expert and a CISO. That's it shows, and it's very good. I might only foot stomp a point about the use of AI. I mean, it is incredibly, to me, just the sophistication of our adversaries in certain nation states, and the investment that these nation states are making. We need to use every tool in our toolbox. And so, the use of AI, machine learning algorithms and the like, to correlate data, to be able to, in a very complex organization, you need to use these tools today to be able to spot anomalies, to be able to protect data and systems, including other AI systems, as Les was also talking about. So to me, we need to champion that. Again, you need to do it responsibly, but product companies in cybersecurity need to use all of these tools, and the government, in our case, the U.S. Government, needs to support that going forward.
Thank you, Richard. And the last we'll divert to you, Ryan, which I know this is an increased focus recently, right? So.
Yep, absolutely. And as Joshua is alluding to, we are preparing a process to harmonize NIST with ANISA, with DOD and MOD and Five Eyes for AI, algorithmic and autonomous systems. So the thing that I'll add to the good answers from Richard and Les is that the very nature of AI, algorithmic and autonomous systems changes the game of what cybersecurity is. And a huge impact is now data entry point attacks, because a large part of what feeds this process of creating these inferences and conclusions of our tools is the data that's fed into the model. So membership inference, model inversion, data poisoning become huge problems that have to be managed from that data entry point attack. And it's a bit of a game changer from what we had in sort of the previous war of cybersecurity. Now the attack vectors have multiplied. But Les made the right point before. The human actually remains the greatest vulnerability in this process as well. And so the things that we can do to increase training and make their approach or how they plug in to cybersecurity solutions and how they receive access to the things that they need access to, and mitigating risk through process is key and critical.
Thank you, Ryan. So I'll take a second and say thank you to all of our participants. Thank Ryan, Richard, and Les for participating. You know, we're out of time today. I think Dr. Schaefer has something to say.
Yes, I just would like to thank Richard, Les, and Ryan. I can't do my job without leaning on insights and wisdom from people like you. So thank you so much. And I wouldn't have fun doing my job without student producers like Ashley and Dr. Scarpino and my other colleagues who are on the call, Dr. Murphy, Dr. Hall, and all of my students. It wouldn't be worth teaching if it wasn't for the group of you. So I really am grateful to everyone who joined us this evening.
Thank you as well, Dr. Donna. I just want to say it was fantastic to be able to work on this effort and to meet these outstanding security experts. I know I learned a lot on this call, and just from the notes and such that we got in the chat, I know that a lot of our students learned a lot as well. So thank you all for joining us today, and to my fellow host, Dr. Scarpino, greatly appreciate you pulling this all together with me. So wishing everyone a wonderful evening. I know that we will get this recording out. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them my way or to Dr. Donna and Dr. Scarpino, and we'll get as many answered for you as possible.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very much.
Thank you.